Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2. Cool.
Let's swap that bad boy out.
Not bad too. Something happened on the way to have an executive episode. It's weird when you listen to a phone call and someone has a I don't know what he thinks about certain issues. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me here at the live desk. I am Janae Hancock. I do want to take another live look at the shot you see here on your screen that we started off with. We are expecting in just minutes now the Johnson County District Attorney's Office. They will be giving an update on an investigation into the Overland Park Foundation. As of right now, 4 officers are on paid administrative leave while the district attorney investigates spending and the use of the foundation. I do want to turn to that press conference now.
Regarding the investigation into the Overland Park FOP Foundation. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the investigators and the attorneys in this office who put in a lot of work to put this investigation together and bring it to this conclusion. You should have received about an hour and a half ago our 18-page report that set forth our findings and conclusions regarding any possible criminal charges. So at this time, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up for questions.
So right now there could be an avenue for civil issues. Could you just explain to me what might happen next? Because I understand it's moving forward in that way.
Yeah, there are 2 different avenues to this. One of them involves the Kansas Attorney General's office is looking to see if there were violations of the Kansas Charitable Organizations and Solicitations Act. So that's a civil action, and that's what we're referencing, is that the criminal investigation has been concluded, but that doesn't preclude the Attorney General's office from taking action in that manner.
Attorney Howe, could you elaborate more about the tablets and all the electronic devices that your team went through? It said that they were wiped, that the data was wiped from them. What conclusion did you come to that indicated that they weren't purposely trying to hide anything from investigators, or was there just simply no evidence that you could trace because of all that?
Well, we couldn't say one way or the other. All we know is that the devices were wiped. The reasons for that being wiped, we don't have an answer to that. All we know that the end result was that any evidence of the business affairs of the foundation that could have been on those devices were gone. So that left, as I put in this 18-page report, left us really behind the 8 ball trying to reconstruct what actually happened with the foundation and what were the reasons for the decisions that were being made.
Is it safe to say that, do you think that hindered maybe the decision that you guys made because that was wiped, just a lack of evidence there? Did that lead to no charges?
It was a significant part of our decision-making process. In addition to, just as I set forth in our report, the foundation basically decided to amend the bylaws from day one and acted in that manner for the majority of the life of the foundation. And by virtue of that, acquiesced to it, that they were going to allow for contributions to be made outside the parameters of the bylaws. And so that acquiescence and just basically the informal amendment of those bylaws really created a problem for us in our investigation.
I'm wondering if you're a person at home listening to this and you see kind of some of the information that you've laid out where you have, you know, fundraisers happening and members of this board are approving money to pay themselves, you know, you would think that somebody at home would say like, well, these people should get in trouble or should be held accountable in some way. Why aren't they being charged with anything? I understand the evidence part, but you know, you do have some information that seems to show some, I'd say like shadowy behavior.
Well, we didn't say that there wasn't shadowy behavior, because there was. There was behavior that, as we indicated in our conclusion, really does not hold those members, those officers of the foundation in a good light. That they really kind of abused their authority to go outside the bylaws. But as we noted in a couple occasions in our report, violation of the bylaws doesn't always equal criminal conduct. And when you basically approve this type of behavior, then that becomes lawful, is what we're arguing. Because if there's a provision in the bylaws that says that those bylaws can be amended by agreement of the board. Well, clearly the board informally approved this type of behavior of the foundation. And that was one of the strong conclusions we came to in this report, was by virtue of their acquiescence, by virtue of them agreeing to give officer assistance outside, or a more liberal interpretation of that, that basically they amended the bylaws informally by their own conduct. And I mean, it's clear that there were many provisions of the bylaws that were not being followed by this foundation. But that doesn't, again, mean that there was criminal conduct involved. And so there were monies being given to FOP members, there were monies being given to board members that was outside the parameters of the bylaws, but they agreed to it in principle, and by virtue of that, prevents us from being able to bring any criminal charges.
From a public standpoint, I guess people would look at this and say, you know, where then is the accountability to them? I mean, from
Sure.
the district attorney, where's the accountability? And if that's the case, I mean, it harms many charities of this nature, because the people might feel like there is no accountability.
Sure. And I understand people's frustrations, and there's a potential of accountability through the Attorney General's office looking at potential repercussions for their conduct. But I think what's really important is my job as district attorney and my office is to follow the law. And if the evidence in the law says that there is not evidence to support criminal charges, it's our duty to follow that. Ethically, I can't file charges just because it's publicly something that the public wants, when ethically we feel like there's no evidence to support that. And so we don't want to succumb to public pressure on this. We want to do, our decisions are based on the evidence and the law, period, end of story. And if you can see from this 18-page report, we spent a lot of time trying to dig through what we could through the evidence that we had, and to make a determination of whether criminal conduct occurred. The problem was some of the evidence was gone. And so that prevented us from maybe uncovering enough evidence to file charges. And we're not saying that the foundation board acted appropriately, but there's a difference between acting appropriately and having criminal conduct. And that's where, as an office, as the district attorney, I have to make sure that ethically that there's evidence and the law supports criminal charges against an individual. We do that every single day. This is a high-profile case, but these are decisions we make each and every day here at the district attorney's office.
Where is the line? I guess since the evidence is gone, that would have been a huge part of it. I guess, is there a line where it's evident, you know, things have been wiped versus obstruction? Where, like, I guess, where is that line?
Yeah. You know, one of the things that we looked at is from our understanding of the facts, through our investigation is that never once did they really keep their minutes or keep their records. And so, then the question becomes, is it criminal conduct? And I think we indicated that in our report. Is it criminal conduct or is it just laziness? And so you have to make that decision. Well, we can't speculate. We have to have some evidence that it's criminal related, that they're trying to cover up something. Our evidence indicated they weren't covering up anything. They were just flat out blatant about how they were distributing funds. The FOP, some of their members received some of those funds. The board clearly received some of those funds. There was no hiding anything. And that's part of the reason why, if you look at our criminal section, we talked about there's no theft by deception, because no one was deceiving anybody. They were pretty blatant about the fact that this is how we were going to conduct our business, that we were going to expand who was going to be available for officer assistance. And by virtue of that, it did not make it a criminal conduct.
Is that maybe the part that you understand, maybe that people in the general public would be most disgusted with? The fact that it was just, as you say, there was no really hiding it. I mean, this was pretty upfront, pretty open, and the fact that even though it's not a, as you say, it does not rise to a criminal complaint, do you understand how people in the public are going to look at this and be utterly disgusted?
Yes,
with what they see?
I think you put it quite well. People are not going to be happy that they donated money thinking that it was for one intended purpose, and instead it was for a much broader purpose that it was being used for. And so we put that in our concluding statements. They violated the public's trust. And clearly that's what you have in this case. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that it can be proven that they exerted unauthorized control over the monies, or that they were deceptive in the use of the money under the charge of theft. And so neither one of those alternatives could be met based on the evidence that we had.
And why is it not fraudulent that, the money is raised and they say it's going to be going for, emergency response for, officers' families after these situations, and then, even apart from how the money is fundraised and divvied up in that way, but then it's actually in the hands of the board, and the board is using it for different reasons. I know you laid out like the broader definition, but why is that not fraudulent?
Well, again, the bylaws can be amended by the board. It doesn't take a vote of the entire FOP. It just took the vote of the board. And by looking at the conduct of the board, even though they did not formalize an amendment to the bylaws, they basically amended the bylaws. That's what they did. And they did it from day one, and it was clear throughout that all the board members basically decided informally that they were going to expand the use of these funds for things outside what was set forth in the bylaws. And that's really what it comes down to. And then, one of the factors that we talked about in this case was also the language that was used in the bylaws, that there was no definition section, which also led things kind of really not, there's no clarity behind it. And then the language of without limitations in the bylaws also adds further problems with being able to determine a person's criminal intent. And so you couple with I think, poorly written bylaws with the acquiescence of the board to say, you know what, we're going to have a broader interpretation of what these monies are used for. And you just outlined over those 18 pages, it became difficult, if not impossible, for us to try to determine whether there was criminal conduct.
Attorney Howe, when it comes to the bylaws, I feel like you also mentioned somewhere that they simply didn't understand the bylaws, or they just didn't realize about when or how they had to follow the bylaws. Could you elaborate on that? With was there times where they just didn't realize they were intentionally violating their own bylaws, or how did that all play out?
Well, we never had an opportunity to interview those officers who were board members, so it would be pure speculation for us to be able to determine what their mindset was, whether it was ignorance of the meaning of the bylaws, or whether or not they just intentionally decided that they were going to violate the bylaws. And so that's another factor that just really hindered our ability to prove criminal conduct at this point. So with the limited evidence that we had, again, that is our conclusion, that some of the evidence is gone. The way that basically the foundation was run also inhibited our ability to construct what was actually happening with the foundation. And then you have the way the bylaws are actually written, allowing for a very liberal interpretation of the use of those foundation funds. So all those factors, that's why we did 18 pages, because it's a complex issue. You can see why it took so long with the investigation as well as putting this report together. This is not a simple black and white issue. It took a lot of effort by attorneys in my office and investigators. We didn't just mail this in. We had a number of lawyers look at this case in my office. They have almost 40 years of experience. They looked at it and came to me and said, Steve, we don't believe that there are charges that we can bring in this case based on the evidence, the bylaws, and the law. I also bring to the table over 30 years of experience. And I used to do white-collar cases before I became DA. So to me, I understood their concerns. And as a district attorney, if I'm not willing to listen to people with that kind of experience telling me that there is not sufficient evidence to file charges, then I'm not doing my job. And quite honestly, if I'm filing charges, even though I've got really experienced people telling me otherwise, then I'm violating my ethical responsibilities as DA. And so whether it is a popular decision or not with some people, the bottom line is that's my responsibility, and I take it very seriously. I'm not going to, again, succumb to public pressure to do something that the evidence says that we cannot do, and that's what it ended up being. Again, we don't like the result. We don't like how the foundation conducted themselves. They are still subject to civil liability through the Charity and Foundation Act. And so there's, that's going to be handled by the Attorney General's office. We'll cooperate with them and provide them all the information we have. So that doesn't close all the doors, but it does close the door on criminal charges regarding those individuals.
I'm sorry, did you say at the beginning of that answer you did not interview the 4 officers who were involved here, even though they're at the center of the investigation? Why was that?
Because they have lawyers. And so the request was made, and they were not. We did not have an opportunity to speak with them.
I think people in the public might be interested to know, if you were solicited for a donation from, an FOP adjacent organization, would you give money? If you get the phone call, what would you recommend people do to make sure that they're keeping their money safe or going to an appropriate thing?
That's a good question, and one of the things that our consumer unit goes out to assisted living facilities, we go out to the general public, and one of the pieces of advice we give is if you are donating to a charity like the Leukemia Association or one of the ALS or one of those organizations that helps other people, what we tell folks over and over again is contribute directly to those organizations. Don't do it over the phone. And the reason why is the vast majority of time, those call centers get the majority of the money. And so if you really want to contribute to those organizations, the best way to do it is directly to those organizations.
But in this situation, even beyond that, the money is kind of questionable where it was going, right? So how are you feeling, kind of seeing how the sausage is made and where the money has been dispersed, over the past few years, at least at the OP's Police Foundation?
Well, clearly, they violate the public's trust on that. And we put that in our report, that just because we could not file criminal charges doesn't mean that it puts a good light on how the foundation was operating and using public funds during outreach when it was making all the phone calls. And everyone's received those phone calls over the years. And I think, again, the most important message is what I just told you, is go directly to those organizations. That way, dollar for dollar goes to them versus a big cut of it going to the telemarketing groups.
Not to belabor this point over and over again, but is it still, for you personally, just shocking to see this kind of behavior from people who really ought to know better? Is that?
Oh, I absolutely agree. It's, again, it violated the public's trust. People provided the money, intending it to be used in a certain way. They abused that, informally amended their bylaws to allow for a more liberal interpretation of it. And it does not put that organization in a good light whatsoever. But again, their violation of their own bylaws and the public's trust in this case did not equal criminal conduct.
As far as the Overland Park Police Officers Foundation goes, Attorney Howe, going forward, I have yet to go through every single page, but do you recommend any reforms for them or changes they should make so they don't run into anything morally wrong like this again? What are those recommendations that you might have?
Well, I think the audit that was done and the recommendations made by that auditor, I think, is spot on. I think they need to professionalize what they're doing. They need to have somebody who actually knows how to handle a charitable organization. They also need to have records of their receipts, of their transactions that they're conducting, which did not occur in this case. And so, yeah, they definitely need help in getting someone who knows what they're doing, how to do a charitable organization. But again, they're still going to have to face the investigation by the Attorney General's office on, we think, are pretty obvious violations of that act.
Do you feel like not being able to interview the 4 officers at the center of this investigation also made things difficult, even though they lawyered up? Could you have subpoenaed them or tried to get them to talk in any other legal way?
The Constitution is the Constitution in all cases, and you have a right to not speak to law enforcement officers by the United States Constitution. Did it help? No. But that's not unusual, and that's why we took other avenues to build our investigation. But every avenue we took, we ran into roadblocks, and the lack of documentation and lack of evidence really played a huge role, coupled with the way the bylaws were written, and resulted in the findings made in this case.
And you mentioned, we're talking about this lack of evidence and the fact that with that, kind of led to no charges, criminal charges being filed. So what does that mean, I guess, for the public's perspective, for the civil charges? People might be saying, hear you say, okay, there was no evidence to bring criminal charges, so with civil charges, how would that work? Would we kind of be in the same result that we're in now, and maybe no civil charges as well?
Well, I can't speak for what the Attorney General's office is going to do with this case. I know our investigators have been in communication with them because they were interested in the part of this investigation. And so we'll continue to work with them, and I don't want to speak for them because I know they're in the middle of their investigation. We'll just have to see how that plays out.
As far as outreach marketing goes, sir, were they part of your side of the investigation, or did you come to any conclusions about their practices tied into all this?
We did not go down that road because they're based out of Arizona, so we wouldn't even have jurisdiction over that organization. But again, it's not unheard of to have that percentage of cut by a company like that. And so I know a lot of people were really concerned about what percentage they got out of making those calls, but that's not unheard of. And the foundation entered a contract, and so they did it with eyes wide open. This was the percentage that company was going to get for making the calls on behalf of the foundation, and so that's really a contractual issue and not really a criminal action.
They were in a contract with outreach marketing when
Yes.
they launched this to begin with, so they knew what they were getting into, the former board members.
Yes. I mean, it was a spelled out contract about what they were going to get, what's their cut. And so just like any other contract, if you're aware of the conditions of the contract, it's not a violation of law. These are individuals who willingly entered into that contract in the parameters of it.
Is there any indication as to what amount of money was actually used for the intended purpose of the foundation initially?
Well, first of all, there was a sum of money. As you know, Officer Mosier lost his life in the line of duty, and some of that money went to him and his family. And the others, it was broken down into, and I'm going to give you approximations because I don't have the spreadsheets in front of me, but it was probably around $74,000 in scholarships. And this is not just to board members, but to all FOP members. And then there was officer assistants and then other assistants. And again, the lack of paperwork indicating what these were for was difficult for us. But the officer assistance over the life of the foundation was about a little over $75,000, and then other assistance about $80,000. And again, that went to both FOP members and board members. I think the bottom line is the amount that we targeted that was being received by board members was a little over $15,500. So, and that differs a little bit from the audit report, but the audit report included monies received by board members before they were board members. So they were just FOP members, and that number was $27,000. So we pulled that back because they were regular FOP members, and the only amount that the board members received was a total of $15,000, a little over $500.
You're the prosecutor, you work with the police a lot, so was that challenging? Like, I'm just wondering, if this was a different organization, would there have been a different result? And just some reflections on that, because these are people that you work closely with.
Sure. It's always a challenge, but we have some pretty dedicated people working in this office who can look past that. And it's not like we don't charge police officers. There's a perception that we don't, but in fact, there are a lot of cases that don't get any press where there's a theft or a domestic violence call. And those cases are filed whether a person's a police officer or not. And I think if you look at my reputation as DA over the years, I'm not afraid to charge politicians, sports figures, you name it. And so while it's disappointing that officers are committing this type of conduct, it's not something that prevents us from doing the right thing. And just this case, like any other case, we base on the evidence and the law and what does it say that we should do. I tell my people all the time, we have a real easy job. Just do the right thing. Follow the evidence and the law, do the right thing. It's a simple equation. Where you see prosecutors getting in trouble is when they don't follow that. And so we try really hard to stay focused on our basic core concepts, which is the evidence and the law and making the right decisions based on that.
Does your office plan to release the audit that triggered the investigation?
Well, the audit was asked for by the FOP, so I'm going to leave it to them to make that decision since it's their document. So I would ask them. Any other questions?
How do the FOP feel about your decision?
I haven't talked.
I haven't heard back yet, but would you expect them to be disappointed or?
I don't know. I'm going to give them an opportunity to sit down and talk to me at a later time. So I haven't discussed this with them, but I'd be more than happy to do so. My hope is that they've shown indications they're trying to turn things around through their conduct, and we'll do whatever we can to help them.
And is there anything you know right now about the status of those 4 officers that were at the center of all this?
You would have to ask the Overland Park Police Department because we did not involve ourselves in their internal affairs investigation. Any other questions?
You said some the money went to Mike Mosher's family, did any money go to Freddie Castro's family when he passed away from COVID while on active duty?
You know, I can't tell you right off the top of my head. My guess is it probably did happen, but I don't have those figures in front of me right now. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity to read through the entire 18-page report, and have a great